His breath was at her ear, not touching, just there. Close enough that the warmth of it moved against the side of her neck. Close enough that the fine hair at her temple stirred. Close enough that every rational thought she had organized for this meeting dissolved. Quietly, completely, like sugar in warm water. She did not move. The blueprint was still in front of her. The city still blazed 42 floors below. The rain was still beginning its soft percussion against the floor-to-ceiling glass. None of that had changed. Everything had changed. His hand reached past her, unhurried, certain, to steady a photograph sliding toward the edge of the glass table. And for 4 seconds, just 4, the back of his hand pressed against her knuckles. Warm, still, present. Her lungs forgot their instructions. She was a professional. She had stood in rooms full of powerful men. She had negotiated impossible contracts at midnight and talked crying brides off ledges at dawn and built love stories out of nothing but instinct and intention. She did not rattle. She was rattling. He stepped back first. The floral direction, he said. His voice was low, unhurried, as if nothing had shifted. As if the room hadn't just rearranged itself around for seconds of contact and the specific warmth of his breath at her neck. Tell me your instinct. She pressed her fingertips together. A collecting of herself, a private ritual, and turned slowly. He was standing 3 feet away. Dark suit, hands clasped behind his back. Watching her with eyes that were patient and focused and terrifyingly present. The kind of attention that makes you feel every word you are about to say has already been considered before you say it. White ranunculus, she said. Her voice was steady. She was proud of it. Not roses. Roses are a performance. She sounds like a woman who has no interest in performing. Something moved in his expression. Barely. A shift like light changing in a deep room. Yes, he said quietly. She isn't. Saraphil nodded. Made a note, and told herself the warmth moving up her forearm was just the temperature of the room. She had been telling herself that for 3 weeks. She was becoming a very unconvincing liar. Before we go any further, if those first lines already did something to your chest, if you are already leaning forward, I need you to take 3 seconds right now. Subscribe to this channel. Like this video. Share it tonight with someone who deserves a love story that reaches somewhere real. This community exists because of you, and what is coming will be worth every second you give it. Now, let's go back to the beginning, because to understand what happened in that penthouse, you need to understand who these 2 people were, before they found each other. Caius Vmir Duvant had built his first company at 22 with borrowed capital and a complete refusal to acknowledge the possibility of failure. By 35, his name appeared in financial headlines less as a person and more as a condition. Something cold, something inevitable, like weather moving in from the coast. Competitors used words like ruthless, like surgical, like impossible. What no journalist had ever been close enough to discover was the violin. It sat in a velvet-lined case on the shelf in his private study. Amber-colored, 1947. The instrument of a man who had taught himself badly, alone, from recordings at age 32. Because someone had once told him that music built patience in a way that nothing else could. He played it poorly. He knew this. He played it anyway, late at night, when the penthouse felt too large and the silence had edges. Drawing the bow across the strings slowly, letting the imperfect sound fill the room. There was an honesty in that sound that nothing else in his life matched. The sound of effort without guarantee. He kept poetry on his nightstand too. Old poetry. The unapologetic kind, pressed between quarterly reports and contract briefs as if even his private life refused a single identity. The people who feared him would not have recognized this man. They would not have recognized him at the Hartley Foundation Gala either. 14 months before the penthouse. Standing completely still for 4 full minutes, watching a woman in a steel blue dress rearrange flowers she had decided were in the wrong position. Not performing the correction. Not drawing attention to herself, just fixing what was wrong, with focused and unhurried hands, as if the 100 people moving around her in sequined dresses and tailored suits were entirely beside the point. He introduced himself. She looked up. No intimidation, no calculation, No performance of being impressed. She looked at him the way you look at a person. Not a headline. The dahlias were in the wrong quadrant, she said. It was making the whole arrangement feel structurally dishonest. He laughed. A real one. The kind that arrived before he could manage it. She smiled briefly and looked back at her work. He stayed for 20 minutes. They talked about why some events moved people and others merely impressed them. About the loneliness of standing in a crowded room and feeling completely unmet by it. She disagreed with him once. Directly. Without softening it. And he lost his train of thought entirely. He drove home. Sat in his car in the underground garage. 11 minutes. Doing nothing at all. He was in love. He understood this with the same quiet clarity he brought to financial analysis. Not comfortable. Not convenient. Completely undeniable. The problem arrived immediately afterward. Every approach available to a man in his position felt wrong. Flowers to her office acquisition. Dinner on his letterhead leverage. She had already shown him in 20 minutes that she saw through the performance of wealth. And underneath all of that lived the deeper fear. The barely nameable one. The one he kept in a locked room even from himself. That if he came to her as just a man, nothing else. No empire. No armor. Just himself. It might not be enough. He spent 3 months thinking. Then he thought of something else entirely. Saraphil Noctrin Hale had a rule. Built at 24. Not broken since. Simple. Load-bearing. Essential. She would build love for other people and she would do it magnificently, and she would not mistake standing close to love for having it herself. She had learned this watching her mother. Her mother had loved a man who came and went on his own private schedule. Who called her extraordinary with complete sincerity. Right up until the moment he needed to be somewhere else. Her mother had lit up like something flammable when he arrived. And burned quietly through it alone when he didn't. Saraphil had watched this for years. And built her entire adult life around the lesson underneath it. Do not organize yourself around a person who hasn't chosen you first. Do not wait by windows. So she built her career instead. By 31, Saraphil Noctrin Hale was the name that serious couples whispered to each other at dinner parties. She was not an event planner. She was an architect of emotional experience. She read a couple's love story and translated it into light and space and detail until guests walked into a room and involuntarily pressed a hand to their sternum. She understood love from the outside with a clarity that people inside it rarely achieved. She had simply never expected it to build a door and walk through it toward her. The contract arrived on a Tuesday in October. Anonymous client. Billionaire budget. Full creative control. The groom wished to be personally involved. The brief used the words intimate and honest 3 times each, without self-consciousness, and ended with a phrase that made her set it down and pick it up again. A love that doesn't need an audience. Just witness. She accepted. She arrived on a Wednesday morning and stepped from the elevator, and he was standing at the window with his back to her. Hands in his pockets. Looking at the skyline with the stillness of a man who had been standing exactly there for some time. He turned. And she felt the recognition settle in her chest like something coming to rest after a long flight. Vmir Duvant. He looked at her with an expression she could not name. Not surprise. Something closer to a man who has been holding his breath. And has quietly, finally, exhaled. Miss Hale, he said. Mr. Duvant. She kept her voice even. I wasn't aware this was your project. It is, he said simply. And gestured to the table. Shall we begin? The weeks that followed were unlike anything in her professional life. He was present for nearly every session. Not intrusively. There was a quality to his presence that was more like gravity than intrusion. Grounded, unhurried, an attentiveness she felt before she could explain it. He asked questions that were too specific. He described the unnamed bride with a precision and a tenderness that began, slowly, persistently, to unsettle her. She finds luxury uncomfortable when it's meant to signal rather than feel, he said one afternoon, standing beside her at the mood board, close enough that she was acutely aware of the warmth radiating from his arm. That's a particular distinction, she said. without looking up. She makes particular distinctions, he said. Saraphil kept her eyes on the samples. What does she look like? She asked. Her voice carefully neutral. A pause. Brief. And full. Like someone who doesn't know how remarkable she is, he said quietly. Which makes her more remarkable. She set down the fabric sample, picked up a different one, did not look at him, and told herself again that this was professional, that this was nothing, that she was building a wedding for a woman this man clearly loved with a specificity that should make her professional heart sing. She told herself this very convincingly. It didn't work at all. Then one afternoon in the third week, something happened that she had not planned for. She had been on her feet for 6 hours. He noticed before she said a word. She wasn't sure how, whether it was the slight shift in her posture or the way she pressed her palm briefly to the table edge. Without comment, without ceremony, he crossed to the corner of the room, pulled a chair, and set it beside her at the table. Close, angled toward her work. Sit, he said, not commanding, just certain. She sat. He continued working, standing beside her, and at some point she couldn't identify exactly when, his hand came to rest on the back of her chair, not touching her, just there. A warmth at the very edge of her awareness, presence at her back, a specific gravity she felt all the way up her spine. They worked like that for 40 minutes. Neither of them acknowledged it. When she stood to leave, he walked her to the elevator, and just before the doors opened, he reached past her to press the button and paused. Half a second. No more. Close enough that she could see the controlled quality of his breathing, the stillness in his jaw, the evidence of a man exercising significant restraint. The doors opened. She stepped in. She stared at her own reflection in the mirrored elevator wall the entire way down to the ground floor and had a very serious conversation with herself about professionalism and appropriate distance and the fundamental danger of mistaking focused attention for something personal. The conversation was completely unconvincing. It got worse. There was an afternoon he stood directly behind her while she reviewed the guest list spread across the long table. She could feel his chest close to her shoulder blades, could feel his breath barely at the edge of her hair. He reached around her to point at a section of the seating chart, his arm extending past her shoulder, and she went, completely still. The way you go still when something beautiful and slightly dangerous is very close and any movement might break it. Here, he said, his voice lower than the distance required. Keep the families separated by this corridor. Give them the illusion of proximity without the obligation of contact. She nodded. She did not trust her voice. There was an evening he reached for a ribbon sample at the exact moment she did. His fingers closed over hers on the table, the pure accident of two people moving toward the same thing simultaneously. He didn't pull back immediately, neither did she. 3 seconds. 4. His thumb moved once across her knuckle. So slowly, she looked up at him. He was already looking at her. Sorry, he said quietly, and removed his hand. The absence of his warmth was a specific, identifiable feeling that she catalogued carefully and then firmly refused to examine. She examined it for the rest of the evening. Then came the night she had not prepared for and would not forget. They had been working late reviewing venue photography. He stood abruptly, said nothing, and disappeared into the kitchen. She heard quiet movement, the low sound of something placed on a surface. And then he returned, with 2 plates, simple food, warm, arranged without ceremony. He set one in front of her without asking if she was hungry, without making it into anything, without waiting for acknowledgement. He simply fed her. She was starving. She hadn't noticed until the smell reached her. You haven't eaten, he said, settling across from her. A fact, not a question. I was focused, she said. You're always focused, he said, and something in the way he said it, not critical, not admiring, just known, as if her particular quality of focus were something he had observed and catalogued and quietly held, made her chest do something she had no professional category for. They ate, they talked, not about the wedding, about real things. He told her about a decision he had made that year that had cost him money and gained him nothing except the ability to sleep at night. She told him about a wedding she had designed 3 years ago for a couple who divorced 8 months later, and how she had sat in her apartment for an entire evening questioning everything she believed about love. "What did you conclude?" he asked. She was quiet for a moment. "That love isn't the problem," she said. "Fear is the problem. People stop before they get anywhere real because the vulnerability required is too much. And retreating feels safer." He was quiet, and then, very evenly, "Yes," he said. "It does feel safer." His eyes held hers. She looked down first. Later, walking to the elevator, their arms brushed in the hallway. A contact so minor it shouldn't have registered as anything. She felt it in her collarbone. She stepped into the elevator, pressed the lobby button, stood very still, and thought, "I am in serious trouble." She was right. The storm came in on a Thursday evening in the 5th week. Fast. The way autumn storms arrive. The light going amber and heavy first, and then the rain hitting the glass hard enough that the city below simply disappeared. Gray static where a skyline had been. The penthouse lights flickered once, twice. Darkness. He found candles in a drawer he knew by memory, which meant he had lit candles here before, alone, which meant something she didn't let herself finish thinking about. For small flames between them on the table. And the room became a different room. Smaller. Warmer. The city erased. The two of them held inside a circle of soft gold light with the rain keeping its loud and private conversation with the glass. She should have rescheduled. She stayed. They abandoned the work. Somewhere between the first hour and the second the planning documents stopped matching and something else entirely took their place. He talked about loneliness without self-pity, the way a person talks about whether they have learned to live inside. He talked about wanting to be known by someone who had no reason to want anything from him except him. Just him. She talked about her mother. Briefly. Carefully. Just enough. She talked about what she believed love required. The courage of the threshold, the declaration inside the ceremony, the way some people spend their whole lives standing in the doorway of their own happiness because stepping through it fully requires a surrender they cannot bring themselves to make. He listened to every word. Not politely. Not while composing his response. He listened the way someone listens when they are memorizing. His hand found hers on the table somewhere in the 3rd hour. Not dramatically. Just there. His palm over the back of her hand. Warm. Still. Certain. She looked at it. Then at him. "Caius," she said softly. "I know," he said. That was all. He didn't move his hand. Neither did she. The candles burned down another inch. The rain kept its conversation with the glass. And she sat in the warmth of that quiet and thought, "I am completely in love with this man. He is engaged to someone else. I have designed their entire wedding with my own hands, and I cannot make myself move away from him." She believed every word of that, except the part about moving away. She drove home at midnight, sat in her car, pressed her forehead to the steering wheel. She had promised herself she would never wait by windows. She was already waiting. If your heart is somewhere between breathless and terrified right now, pause for 1 second and drop a comment below. Tell me what you think she is about to find, because we are walking right to the edge of it. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please, right now. This story is about to change everything. It was a Tuesday. He stepped out for a board call, his voice dropping into its other register, controlled, authoritative, the sound of a man the rest of the world recognized. She was alone in the study, looking for a venue timeline she had printed that morning. She checked the side drawer of the drafting table. Stuck. Then released too far. A folder fell to the floor and opened as it fell. She leaned down to collect it, and saw her name, her full name, clean serif typeface on what was clearly an invitation mock-up, positioned exactly where a bride's name sits. Saraphil Noctrin Hale. The air left the room. She sat down on the floor, not dramatically. Her legs simply stopped. She pulled the folder toward her and looked at its contents with the careful attention of someone who needs facts before feeling, because feeling right now would be catastrophic. Her measurements. Exact. on a gown specification sheet. Numbers she recognized because she had been fitted for formal wear twice this year. A ring design, custom. She stared at the engraving specification printed along the inner band. Her birthday, month, day, year. She pressed the folder closed with both palms and sat in the silence of his study. The candles from the storm still in their holders. The violin in its velvet case on the shelf. The drawer he had found in the dark by memory. And she felt the entire architecture of the past 6 weeks. Every session, every evening, every moment she had filed under professional proximity and refused to examine, restructure itself. Around this, the way he had described the bride. Quiet mornings, candlelight over chandeliers. A woman who fixes things instead of performing. A woman who doesn't know how remarkable she is. The dinner placed in front of her without asking. The hand on the back of her chair. The thumb moving once across her knuckle. I know, he had said, in the candlelight, his palm warm over hers. I know. He had been describing her to herself. Across 6 weeks, while she built it all with her own hands. She felt anger arrive first. Clean, clarifying, legitimate, and then, underneath it, moving through it like current through deep water, the most dangerous feeling of all, the feeling of being seen, not glanced at, not admired from a distance, seen with specificity and seriousness and a patience that no one had ever brought to the task of knowing her before, which was the most infuriating thing she had ever felt. And she felt it, completely. She stood up, smoothed her jacket, and walked out. She found him on the terrace. He turned before she reached him, as if he had been waiting for this moment longer than today. She watched his eyes drop to the folder in her hand and rise slowly to her face. And she saw what she had never seen in him before. Fear. Real. Unmanaged. Unguarded. Who is the bride, Caius? Not a question. Her voice level in the specific way voices go level when the only alternative is falling apart. And that is not an option. He put his hands in his pockets. She understood why. He was keeping them from shaking. You, he said, soft as a confession. Soft as something that had been held for a very long time, and was finally, carefully, set down. Everything, she said. Right now. Do not calculate it. The truth. I met you 14 months ago, he said. Hartley Gala. You were fixing flowers and you spoke to me like I was a person, and I drove home and I sat in my car and I couldn't move because I have never. He stopped. Something moved across his face. I felt something I had no infrastructure for, and every way I had of approaching you felt wrong. Like acquisition. Like leverage. You had already shown me in 20 minutes that you weren't interested in being acquired. His jaw tightened. And underneath all of that was the fear that if I came to you as just a man, nothing else, that it might not be enough. The rain was soft between them. She waited. So you built a wedding, she said. I built a reason for you to stay long enough to know me, he said. I wanted to show you my intention in a language you understood. I didn't want to manipulate you. A pause. I understand if that distinction doesn't matter from where you're standing. She looked at him for a long time. She felt the betrayal. Clearly. Legitimately. She had worked on this for 6 weeks without the information that made it make sense. She had disciplined feelings for 6 weeks that she might have handled entirely differently had she known. But she also recognized something. She recognized it because she had felt the same fear herself, of being wanted for the wrong reasons, of coming to someone with everything you are and watching it not be enough. He had been afraid. And instead of retreating into his empire and his armor and his carefully constructed safety, he had tried, imperfectly, elaborately, with complete and unmistakable sincerity. And then she thought about the dinner he had placed in front of her without making it into anything. The hand on the back of her chair for 40 minutes. Present without touching. The half-second pause at the elevator. The restraint. 6 weeks of it. Never pushing, never leveraging, always giving her the complete freedom to leave. He had been telling her who he was the entire time. She simply hadn't known she was the reason. I need to think, she said quietly. Take whatever time you need. His voice was controlled. His hands, even in his pockets, were not. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. She left without looking back. Because if she looked back, she would stay. And she wasn't ready yet. She didn't sleep. She sat in her apartment with cold tea and she went through all of it. Every meeting, every evening, every moment she had filed away and refused to examine. She went through it now with new eyes, and it clarified like a photograph resolving from blur into focus. Every detail sharpening. Every moment finding its meaning. The dinner. The chair. The elevator pause. The controlled breathing of a man holding himself back. Restraint across 6 weeks as a form of respect. As a form of choosing. She thought about her mother. About windows. About organizing a life around someone who hadn't chosen you first. He had chosen her first. Before she knew she was in the room. She pressed her palms against her eyes and sat in the gray early light and felt the wall she had built at 24. Carefully, necessarily, brick by careful brick. Develop a crack so deep and so specific that she understood with complete clarity. It was not going to hold. The letter arrived under her door before morning. No envelope. Folded paper. Slid through quietly. The handwriting controlled, in the way of a man who has trained himself to be controlled, except in certain places. Where the pen pressed harder. Where the letters leaned forward. Where the discipline thinned. And something true showed through the gap. He wrote, "I am not writing this to change your answer. I am writing it because you asked for truth and I gave you facts, which are not the same thing. The truth is I have never been afraid of anything the way I am afraid of losing the possibility of you. The truth is the night the lights went out and we talked for 3 hours I felt more known than I have felt in years. And it had nothing to do with money or position or any of the things I used to feel certain in the world. The truth is my hands were shaking when I poured that wine. The truth is they are shaking now. If you walk away I will accept it. But you asked for truth and this is it, without architecture around it, for whatever it is worth to you." She read it once. She read it again. She sat with it in the pale gold of early morning while the city outside her window slowly woke. And she thought about a man who played violin badly alone at night and kept poetry between contract briefs and whose hands shook when he poured wine and again when he wrote letters he wasn't sure would ever be answered. She thought about how she had driven home from that penthouse a dozen times arguing with herself. Losing every single argument. She thought about the feeling, that specific, terrifying, undeniable feeling, of being in a room with someone and feeling found. She put on her coat. He was in the study when she arrived. He stood when she walked in. Said nothing. Gave her everything, the floor, the room, the outcome, without reservation. Without preemption. The way a man stands when he has decided that whatever happens next belongs entirely to someone else. She stood across from him. "If I walk down that aisle," she said carefully, "it will be because I chose to, not because I was arranged there or built into a corner I couldn't see until I was already standing in it. Because I chose, with everything I know and everything I feel, freely." She held his gaze. "Do you understand the difference?" Something released in him. A tension she understood now had been living in his chest for a very long time. "It always was your choice," he said quietly. "I only built the table. Everything that happened at it," he paused, "was yours from the beginning." She crossed the room, stopped in front of him, close enough to see the slight irregularity in his breathing, the controlled stillness of a man who was not entirely controlled. "I'm not marrying you because you planned it," she said. "I know," he said, barely above quiet. "I'm marrying you," she said, "because you put dinner in front of me without asking and stood behind my chair for 40 minutes without touching me and wrote me a letter with shaking hands before the sun came up." She paused. "Because the night of the storm you put your hand over mine and all you said was 'I know,' and that was the most honest thing anyone has said to me in years." She looked at him. "And because I have been losing arguments with myself about you since the 3rd week. And I am tired of losing them." His hand came up slowly, curved around her face. His thumb traced her cheekbone. Once, with the particular care of someone handling something they have been quietly, privately terrified of losing. "Saraphil," he said. Her name, her full name, kept carefully, for exactly this moment. She leaned into his hand. "Let's finish planning the wedding," she whispered. His forehead came down to rest against hers. They stood like that, not kissing, not speaking, just breathing the same small warm space of air between them. And she felt the thing that had been building across 6 weeks of charged silences and restrained touches and arguments she kept losing. Finally, completely, arrive. The ceremony was 40 people on a private estate in November. Early evening, amber light through bare trees, everything stripped to its essential form, becoming a different kind of beautiful. She had designed every detail herself. This time knowing. This time with the full weight of whose threshold she was building toward, whose life she was stepping into, whose name was engraved in the ring that had been waiting in a drawer while she chose flowers and fabrics and the precise quality of light for a wedding she thought belonged to someone else. The white ranunculus, the candlelight over chandeliers, the corridor between families, proximity without obligation. She had built it all for herself before she knew it was hers. Some part of her, she thought, had always known. He saw her from the far end of the garden path. She saw his hands first. Those steady, empire-building hands that had navigated billion-dollar negotiations without a visible tremor were shaking, just slightly, just barely. A trembling so small that only someone who had been paying the specific quality of attention she had been paying to his hands for weeks would ever catch it. She smiled before she reached him. When she arrived at his side, he looked at her the way a man looks at something he spent a long time being afraid he would never have. Not with triumph, with the quiet of relief, of arrival, the extraordinary stillness of being exactly where you were always walking toward, even when you didn't know it. Their vows were true things, spoken quietly, with amber light and 40 witnesses and bare trees holding the ceremony in their stripped and honest branches. When he said, "I choose you specifically and completely, and I will keep choosing you past every version of myself that comes after this moment." His voice was steady. His hands, held in hers, were not. She held them through every word. Their first kiss as husband and wife was slow, serious, tasted like the end of a very long-held breath. He pressed his forehead immediately to hers after, eyes closed, her name moving soundlessly on his lips, and 40 people went completely still. The way people go still when they understand they are not watching a performance. They are watching something real. Later, when the guests had gone and the estate had settled into its quiet and the last candles had burned to warm soft nothing, she lay with her back against his chest in the window seat of the room filled with white ranunculus. Her recommendation, months ago, for a bride she hadn't yet known was herself. She traced the lines of his hand where it rested over hers. The knuckles, the slight scar along his index finger she had noticed weeks ago and never asked about. The specific warmth she understood now she had been aware of since the very first night. Since his breath had been at her ear and his hand had pressed against hers over a sliding photograph and she had told herself, it was just the temperature of the room. Outside, the city burned on, brilliant and indifferent, 42 floors below and entirely uninvited up here. "You were always the only bride," he said softly. Not a declaration for a room. A fact, spoken in the dark. For her alone. "I know," she said. A beat of quiet. Then, "Were you afraid?" "Today. When you saw me walking toward you." "Profoundly," he said. She smiled. "Your hands were shaking," she said. "They were," he said. Without embarrassment. Without apology. "They have been shaking since the night I sat in my car for 11 minutes and understood what had happened to me." She turned slightly and looked at him in the dim warm light. This man who had played violin badly and kept poetry between contract briefs and built an elaborate, imperfect, deeply sincere bridge across the distance his own fear had made. And she felt something she had no single word for. Except, home. She pressed her lips to the corner of his jaw. Once, gently, without urgency. His arm tightened around her, like a question. Finally, answered. The candle on the windowsill burned low. And the rain returned, soft and unhurried, its old conversation with the glass resuming, as if it had simply paused, to let them catch up. "I have one question for you before you go." And I need your honest answer in the comments below. When she found that folder, when she saw her own name on that invitation, her measurements on the gown, her birthday engraved in a ring he had already commissioned while she was still building a wedding she thought belonged to someone else, would you have walked out and never looked back? Or would you have stood in that doorway and demanded the truth and stayed to hear it? Was what Caius did romantic? Or was it a beautiful kind of wrong? And tell me, honestly, at which moment did you feel it? The dinner he placed in front of her without asking? The hand on the back of the chair for 40 minutes, not touching? Just there? The letter arriving under her door before the sun came up, with the handwriting leaning in the places where the discipline ran out? Tell me in the comments. Every single one gets read. This community deserves this conversation. And if this story found something real in you tonight, if it gave you that quiet and particular ache of something that matters, please subscribe to this channel right now. Like this video. Share it tonight with one person who needs to believe that love sometimes finds its way to you, even when you have stopped looking for it, and started building it for everyone else instead. Because the next story is already waiting, and I think it will reach somewhere even deeper than this one did.